Hello there. Space does not stay the same as you travel outward. It grows colder, darker, and emptier at every single step with no stretch of relief along the whole road. Leave the warmth of the sun and the warmth fails while the light still shines. Leave the light behind and the stars themselves thin to almost nothing. Leave the galaxy and the space beyond is emptier still. Ruled by a weight that gives off no light and by dark holes from which nothing returns. Every edge you cross turns out to open onto something larger and quieter than the last. Tonight we travel that whole road outward from the edge of the sun's warmth to the farthest edge of anything the universe has ever let us see. If you find these slow journeys outward worth your time, a like or a subscribe helps the channel reach others who do. Thank you for being here. But for the next 2 hours, none of this is anything you need to carry. The cold and the dark are very far away, and you are somewhere warm. Settle in. Let your shoulders soften. Let your breathing slow. Let the day fade away. Let's begin. Part 1. There is no single edge. The first thing to understand about the edge of space is that there is no single edge. There is no wall waiting out there in the dark. No shoreline, no last fence with a sign hung on it to tell a traveler that the universe has ended and something else has begun. What waits instead is a long series of thresholds. Each one a place where something familiar quietly runs out. The warmth runs out first. Then the light that guides runs out. Then the pull of the sun runs out. Then the stars themselves thin away. And after them the galaxies until at the very end even the ability to see anything at all comes to a stop. Each of these is an edge in its own way. And each one once crossed turns out to have a larger and quieter emptiness lying on the far side of it. This is the strange rhythm of a journey outward. And it is worth settling into before we begin because it will repeat again and again tonight. Every time we reach what looks like the boundary of the known, the boundary dissolves as we approach it. What seemed like an ending becomes a threshold. And beyond that threshold, a new dark opens, colder than the last and wider than the last, with its own distant edge shimmering somewhere ahead. The universe is built in layers, each nested inside the next, except that none of the layers has walls. There is only the slow fading of one thing and the slow beginning of another. We should say plainly what we mean by Scarier since the title of this journey promises it, and we will keep our promise in the only way this channel ever does, which is gently. The unease out here is not the sudden kind. Nothing is going to leap from the dark. The disco is the quiet kind. The kind that comes from noticing how much colder, how much darker, and how much emptier each new region is than the one before. And from realizing how little of what governs it can ever be seen at all. That is the feeling we will follow outward tonight, one threshold at a time. And it is a feeling that can be held calmly, the way you might hold a smooth stone, turning it over without any need to put it down. Consider the traveler we are sending out. It is not a spacecraft and it is not a person in a suit and it does not need air or fuel or a way home. The traveler is simply your attention drifting outward through the dark at whatever pace your mind allows, pausing at each edge long enough to feel the cold deepen and the light thin before easing onward again. There is no hurry to any of it. The distances ahead are so enormous that no real journey could ever cross them. And so we will cross them the only way they can be crossed, which is in thought, slowly and half asleep. 3 things will change as we go, and it is worth naming them now so you can feel them shifting beneath the surface of everything that follows. The first is temperature. We begin in warmth near a star in the one reliably comfortable place there is. And from here the temperature will fall and fall past the cold of the outer planets, past the deeper cold between the stars, all the way down toward the coldest number that nature allows. The second is darkness. We begin under a bright disk of a sun, and we will watch that sun shrink to a spark, and then watch the stars themselves grow sparse, until at last the brightest things in the sky are older than the earth, and too faint to cast a shadow. And the third is the pull of things that cannot be seen. This one grows slowest and matters most because by the end of the journey, the universe will turn out to be governed almost entirely by mass we can never look at and by objects from which no light ever returns. It helps to say a word about scale before we set out because the numbers ahead will grow past anything the body has ever felt and there is a gentle way to hold them. We are used to distances we could walk or drive or fly across in a day. The distances tonight are not like that. Very early in the journey, we will pass the point where such comparisons stop meaning anything. And we will begin measuring in the time it takes light to travel because nothing else will do. A light second, a light hour, a light year. Each one is simply how far light gets in that much time. And light is the fastest thing there is. When a distance is 1,000 light-years across, it means that light outrunning everything still needs 1,000 years to cross it. The universe is built at that scale. And we will let the scale wash over us slowly rather than trying to seize it all at once. There is a comfort in taking it gradually, one threshold at a time, rather than leaping straight to the largest number. If you tried to jump from your own doorstep to the edge of sight in a single thought, the mind would simply refuse it the way the eye refuses to look at the sun. But if you step outward gently, from the warm world to the cold planets, from the planets to the frozen shell, from the shell to the nearest stars, each step is only a little larger than the last. And the mind can follow. That is how we will travel. Not in one impossible leap, but as a slow drift outward, letting each new emptiness settle before we move on to the next. And it is worth noticing before we leave, how rare the ground beneath us truly is. Almost nowhere in the universe is there a solid surface warmed by a nearby star, wrapped in air, holding liquid water, lit by a soft blue sky. That combination which we think of as ordinary is one of the rarest arrangements in all of existence. Nearly everywhere else is cold or dark or airless or empty or all of these together. We begin the journey standing on one of the universe's rare exceptions. And part of what the outward road teaches is simply how exceptional the starting place was. The dark we are about to enter is the ordinary condition of things. The warmth and light we are leaving behind are the strange and precious anomaly. So we set out from the anomaly into the ordinary, which is to say into the dark. The traveler lifts away from the warm world and turns outward. And the first thing to fade sooner than anyone expects is the warmth itself. It does not vanish at a boundary. It ebbs quietly the way heat esps from a hearth when the fire burns low and we follow it outward as it thins drifting toward the first of the night's many edges. One more thing is worth settling before we go, and it is a question of feeling rather than fact. People often imagine that a journey into deep space would be frightening because of what might be found there. Some presence in the dark. Some danger waiting. The truth is stranger and quieter. The dark holds no presence. It holds no danger of that kind. What makes the outward road sobering is exactly the opposite of a lurking something. It is the steady revealing of an enormous nothing. Region after region of cold and empty space growing larger and emptier the farther out we drift. There is nothing out there to fear in the ordinary sense. There is only the immense and patient absence of nearly everything and the slow understanding of how much of that absence there is. That is a feeling worth learning to hold gently, and the whole journey is a practice in holding it. And notice as we prepare to set out that everything ahead can be met at the pace of the breath. There is no race to the edge of the universe. The distances are so far beyond any real crossing that the only way to travel them is the slow way in thought, unhurried pausing wherever the mind wishes to rest. If you drift off somewhere along the road tonight, out among the frozen worlds or in the empty gulf between the stars or in the deep quiet of a great void, that is not a journey left unfinished. It is simply a place to rest. And every place we will pass is a place worth resting in. Hold those three threads loosely as we begin. Colder, darker, and more ruled by the invisible at every step. That is the whole shape of the night. And the first threshold is close, closer than you might think, because the edge of warmth is not far out at all. It begins to fade almost the moment we leave the ground. Part 2, the edge of warmth. We begin in the one place in the whole universe that can be relied upon to be warm, and that place is near a star. It is easy to forget how unusual warmth is because we have never lived anywhere without it. But warmth is not a property of space. Space itself is bitterly cold almost everywhere. Warmth is something a star makes and pours outward, and it thins as it travels according to a rule that never bends. Sunlight spreads over a sphere that grows as the square of the distance from its source. Double the distance from the sun and you quarter the warmth that arrives. Move 10 times farther and you receive 1/100 as much. The rule is quiet and simple and utterly without mercy. And it is the reason the outer worlds are cold. At the distance where the Earth orbits, the arriving sunlight is strong enough to keep water liquid and to hold a whole living world at a temperate balance. This is the warmth we take for granted. The warmth of an afternoon of sunlight on skin. But that same sunlight, following the same rule, weakens with every step outward. By the time it reaches the largest planet, it has fallen to a small fraction of its strength at the Earth. And the world it lights there is wrapped in a cold that never lifts. A cold that would freeze the breath and then the blood in moments. And that planet is not even halfway to the edge of the region we would call home. Travel to the farthest of the major planets out where the great blue worlds turn slowly in the dark and the sunlight has fallen to something near 1,000th of its strength at the Earth. Noon on such a world is not bright. It is a deep blue twilight, the kind of light you might find on Earth in the last few minutes before full dark, except that it never brightens and never fades. The sun there is still the brightest thing in the sky by far, a fierce white point too brilliant to look at directly, but it is only a point now. It has no disk you could measure with the eye, and it gives, for all its brightness, almost no warmth at all. This is worth pausing on because it is the first of the strange reversals we will meet tonight. Up close, light and warmth arrive together. The sun that lights the sky is the same sun that heats the ground. And we come to think of them as one thing. But out here they come apart. The light still arrives plainly and brightly while the warmth has drained almost entirely away. You could stand in full sunlight with the sun blazing in a black sky and freeze. Light without warmth is the first sign that we have left the comfortable world behind, and it is only the first. Keep moving outward and the warmth continues to fall without any wall to stop it. There is no sharp line where sunlight abruptly ceases to be warm. It simply grows fainter and fainter until very quickly it carries too little energy to matter to anything. Past a certain distance, an object drifting in the dark is no longer kept warm by the sun in any meaningful way. Whatever warmth it has, it must supply itself from whatever faint heat is left over in its core. Or else it takes on the temperature of empty space, which is measured in a few tens of degrees above the coldest temperature there can be. And even that small warmth is not the sun's doing. It is the faint background warmth of the universe as a whole. A subject we will come to much later at the very edge of everything. So the first edge is not a boundary you could touch. It is the place where warmth quietly gives out while the sun still shines overhead. The traveler crosses it without any sense of a crossing. Feeling only that the light that once meant comfort has become a cold light. A light that illuminates without heating, hanging in a sky that grows darker with every step. The sun does not abandon us at this edge. It simply becomes too far away to keep us warm, and we go on outward into a cold that from here will only deepen. Consider what the fading of warmth does to the worlds it leaves behind, because their coldness is not empty of interest. The inner planets close to the fire are scorched and dry, their surfaces baked, any water long since boiled away. A little farther out lies the temperate band, the narrow ring of distances where a world can hold liquid water and a gentle climate, and it is a narrow ring indeed, a thin zone of comfort around the star with harshness on either side. Move past it, and the worlds turn to cold. The great outer planets are not solid at all in the way the inner worlds are. They are enormous balls of gas and ice wrapped in atmospheres thousands of miles deep. And within those atmospheres, the cold grows so severe that gases we think of as air on Earth turn to liquid and even to ice. On the moons of those outer worlds, the cold takes strange and beautiful forms. There are moons out there sheathed entirely in ice. Their surfaces frozen so hard that the ice behaves like rock, cracked and ridged and ancient. There are moons where the cold is so deep that rivers and lakes are filled not with water but with liquids that on Earth would only ever be gases, methane and its kin pooling in frozen basins under a dim and distant sun. The warmth that we take for granted, the warmth that keeps water liquid and air breathable simply does not exist out here. And in its absence, the ordinary substances of the world rearrange themselves into forms we would hardly recognize. Cold is not merely the absence of heat. At these depths, it is a force that reshapes whole worlds. And still the sun hangs in the sky above all of it, bright and useless, a fierce point of light that warms nothing. This is the deep strangeness of the edge of warmth worth returning to because it prepares us for every reversal that follows. We grow up believing that where there is light, there is warmth, that the two are one thing, that a sunlit place is a warm place. It is true only close to home. Out among the cold moons, the sunlight is real and bright and entirely without heat, and a traveler standing in it would freeze solid beneath a sun that blazed overhead. The first lesson of the outward road is that the comforts of home were local and provisional, and are already beginning to come apart, one at a time, as the distance grows. We drift on past the last of the great cold worlds, past the frozen moons and the deep blue twilight, and the sun shrinks a little further behind us, and the warmth that was already faint fades toward nothing at all. Ahead, there is no more warmth to lose. There is only the next threshold, where the sun's breath, rather than its heat, finally gives out. And here is a quiet mercy in the arrangement of things. The very rule that starves the outer worlds of warmth is the rule that keeps the inner worlds from being scorched to nothing. The same falling off of sunlight with distance that leaves the far planets frozen is what spreads the sun's fierce output thin enough at our own distance to be gentle rather than deadly. We sit in the one narrow band where the arithmetic comes out kind, close enough for warmth and far enough for safety. And the coldness of everything beyond us is simply the other side of the same law that makes our own place livable. The cold out there and the comfort here are written in the same single rule. Notice as we drift past this first threshold, how much of what we assumed was permanent was really just a matter of nearness. The warmth of a sunlit day which felt like a fixed feature of the world turns out to have been a local thing available only in a thin shell close to the fire. Step out of that shell and it is gone, though the fire still burns in plain sight. There is a lesson in this that the rest of the journey will repeat in a dozen forms. Almost everything that feels solid and permanent about the sky is a gift of being close to something. And the farther out we go, the fewer of those gifts remain. Part 3, The Edge of the Wind. The sun does something besides shine. It breathes. From its surface, it pours a continuous stream of charged particles outward in every direction. A thin and fast and endless wind that races out through the solar system and far beyond the planets. This wind is faint, almost past believing. It is emptier than any vacuum that could be made in a laboratory on Earth. So sparse that in any small volume of it, you might find only a handful of particles. And yet it fills the entire space around the sun, and it moves fast and it pushes. Where its outward push finally comes into balance against the thin gas that drifts between the stars, there is a wall. This wall is one of the very few genuine boundaries we will meet on the whole journey. Nearly every other edge tonight is a fading, a place where something grows too weak to matter. But this one is closer to a true edge, a real surface with an inside and an outside. Inside it, the space belongs to the sun. The particles are the sun's particles blown from its own surface. Outside it, the space belongs to the galaxy filled with the material that lies between the stars. The wall is the place where the sun's breath finally gives out and the wider galaxy begins. The sun's wind does not simply stop at this wall. It slows in stages, and the crossing has a structure to it. Far out, where the rushing wind first begins to feel the pressure of the gas beyond, it slows abruptly, piling up against what lies ahead. Past that it enters a turbulent churning region where the wind is dense and hot and confused, mixing with the material it has been pushing against for so long. And at the outer edge of that region lies the true wall, the surface beyond which the wind cannot go, where the last of the sun's breath gives way to the cold, still gas of interstellar space. A traveler crossing outward would feel the character of everything around them change at that surface. From the fast, thin wind of the sun to the slower, denser, colder material of the galaxy itself. Only a very few objects made by human hands have ever traveled far enough to reach and cross this wall. And when they did, their instruments recorded the change directly. The particles around them shifted in kind. The count of certain sorts of radiation rose. The steady wind of the sun fell away and the material of the galaxy took its place. In those readings was the quiet fact of a threshold crossed. The moment of leaving the sun's own bubble for the first time and entering at last the space between the stars. The distance to this wall is enormous. It lies many times farther from the sun than the farthest major planet. So far that sunlight itself moving at the fastest speed anything can move takes the better part of a day to cross the gap from the sun to the wall. To the traveler who began the night on a warm and sunlit world, that distance is almost beyond holding in the mind. And yet, measured against what comes next, it is nothing at all. The bubble the sun blows around itself, for all its vastness, is a small thing, adrift in a far larger dark. Crossing its wall does not bring us to the edge of the sun's domain in the fullest sense. It brings us only to the edge of the sun's breath. The sun's pull through gravity reaches vastly, vastly farther, and it is that reach we cross next. There is something quietly moving about the fact that the sun keeps a bubble around itself at all. It is a warm wind-filled hollow blown into the cold of the galaxy, and everything we have ever known lies inside it. Every planet, every moon, every comet, every living thing that has ever existed, all of it has spent its entire history tucked within this single breath of a single star. To reach the wall of the bubble and pass through it is to leave that shelter for the first time and to understand in a plain physical way how thin the shelter has always been. On one side the space that belongs to home. On the other, the space that belongs to everything else, and the wall between them is not a wall you could lean against. It is only the place where the sun stops being able to push. It is worth lingering on what the bubble of the sun's wind actually does for everything inside it, because its purpose is quiet and protective. The galaxy beyond is not empty in the way we might hope. It is threaded with radiation, with fast particles that race through interstellar space at tremendous speeds, remnants of distant stellar deaths and violent events far away. These particles stream through the galaxy in all directions. And they are harmful to delicate things, to living things, to the fragile chemistry that life depends upon. The sun's wind, filling its bubble, pushes back against much of this incoming radiation, deflecting a good portion of it, thinning the sleet of particles that would otherwise pour unimpeded onto the worlds inside. The bubble is not only a boundary, it is a shield. So the wall we cross at the edge of the wind is also the edge of a kind of protection, and stepping past it means stepping into the fuller radiation of the open galaxy. This is one of the real difficulties that any journey between the stars would face, and it is a quiet reminder of how much the sun does for the worlds it holds. It warms them, yes, and lights them. But it also wraps them in this immense blown bubble that softens the harshness of the wider galaxy. And everything that has ever lived has lived inside that shelter, never once feeling the full force of what lies beyond it. To cross the wall is to feel that force for the first time. The shape of the bubble itself is worth picturing because it is not a perfect sphere. The whole solar system is moving through the galaxy, drifting along its great orbit around the center. And as it moves, the bubble is pushed into a rounded blunt shape at the front, where it plows into the oncoming interstellar gas and drawn out into a long trailing shape behind, like the wake of a boat moving through water. The sun and its planets ride near the front of this moving bubble, pressed against the leading edge. And the wall of the bubble lies closer to us in the direction of our travel and farther in the direction we have come from. Even this enormous shelter, then, is a thing in motion, shaped by its passage through the galaxy. Its walls closer on one side and farther on the other. We cross the wall at its nearest point, where the leading edge presses against the oncoming gas and the fast thin wind of the sun falls away behind us, and the slower, colder, denser material of the galaxy closes in around us. There is no sound to it because there is nothing to carry sound. There is only the quiet change in everything. The shift from the sun's own space to the space that belongs to the galaxy at large. And the sense unmistakable now that we have truly left home. Ahead, the sun's gravity still reaches, holding its distant frozen shell, and we drift on toward it, out where the sun is no longer a disk at all. It is worth remembering, too, that only a handful of objects made by human hands have ever traveled this far, and they carry no crew. And send back only the faintest trickle of signal across the enormous gap. They are small, cold, and slow, drifting outward now through the edge of the sun's domain, still faintly speaking to us across a distance that grows every day. Long after their voices fall silent, they will drift on out past the wall of the wind, out into the space between the stars, carrying their small human cargo through the dark for spans of time longer than our whole recorded history. They are the farthest things we have ever touched, and they are barely at the doorstep of the journey we are taking tonight in thought. There is a quiet wonder in the fact that the sun keeps this bubble breathing steadily across the ages, never pausing, never slackening for long, pouring its thin wind outward in every direction for billions of years without rest. The shelter it makes is not a thing built once and left standing. It is a thing continuously made, held open by a constant outward breath, so that if the sun ever fell quiet, the bubble would slowly collapse inward as the pressure of the galaxy pressed in. That it has never fallen quiet. That the breath has held steady through the whole long history of life on Earth is part of the deep constancy of the star we belong to, faithful in this, as in its warmth and its light. It is easy to forget that the shelter is an ongoing act rather than a finished wall. And there is a quiet reassurance in remembering that the sun is at this very moment still breathing it open around us all. We pass through it slowly and the wind falls away behind us, and ahead there is a stillness we have not met before because we are now in the space that lies between the stars and there is no wind here at all. Part 4. The edge of the sun's reach. Past the wall of the wind, the sun no longer holds the space around it with its breath. But it still holds it with its gravity. And gravity reaches much, much farther than any wind. Surrounding the entire solar system, far beyond the planets and far beyond the bubble of the wind, there is thought to lie an immense shell of frozen bodies. It is a sprawling cloud of dark, icy objects, uncountable in number. Each one loosely bound to the sun, drifting in slow motion through a cold so deep it can barely be described. This shell is so far out that the objects within it take not years and not centuries, but many thousands of years to complete a single orbit around the sun. Some of them take longer than that. A single circuit for the most distant of them can last longer than